I call to order this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors for a regular meeting. Good evening, Mr. Powell. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Eisenhower.
Here.
Mr. Hippel.
Here.
Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Here.
Ms. Sadler.
Here. Next on the agenda, we're going to have a presentation this evening, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Powell while I wander down.
Thank you, Ms. Sadler. I just wanted to make a few introductory comments. Of course, you all know Mr. Michael Vergakis. Also pleased that his wife Linda is here with him today. When I first came to the James City Service Authority about 5 years ago, it was about the same time that DEQ was telling us that they wanted to reduce our groundwater withdrawal permit. And so Michael and I ended up spending a lot of quality time together from the very beginning of my tenure at JCSA. And I quickly realized how good Michael was and how much I could trust him. And I have relied on him very heavily over the last 5 years. And, you know, I've told Michael this before, but he's taught me a lot. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to personally thank him for all he's done for JCSA and for me during a combined 24 years of service to the Service Authority. So I just wanted to say that. And Ms. Sadler, if you would like to read the resolution.
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to. You're not allowed to go. We won't let you. That's in the resolution. Whereas Mr. Michael Vergakis has been employed by the James City Service Authority, JCSA, as Chief Water Engineer from October 1992 through October 1997, and again from November 2001 through January 2020. And whereas Mr. Vergakis is retiring effective January 31, 2020, whereas Mr. Vergakis has been involved in every water project during his combined 24 years of service, and whereas Mr. Vergakis has overseen tremendous growth in the system during his tenure, in 1993, JCSA had 7,200 water customers and 195 miles of water lines. Today, JCSA has 22,832 customers and 414 miles of water lines. And whereas Mr. Vergakis was the project manager for the Five Forks Water Treatment Plant that provides 5 million gallons a day of water treated by reverse osmosis and is the primary water source for the JCSA's customers. And whereas Mr. Vergakis has been active in developing options for JCSA's next water supply, and whereas Mr. Vergakis assumed management responsibility for all water-related functions at JCSA, which has resulted in a more coordinated delivery of service and increased efficiency. And whereas Mr. Vergakis' professionalism, work ethic, integrity, and team-oriented approach are example for all employees, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the James City Service Authority does hereby recognize Mr. Michael Vergakis and presents this resolution as a token of appreciation for his dedicated service to the James City Service Authority. Be it further resolved that the Board of Directors offers its best wishes to Mr. Vergakis in his retirement. Congratulations. Lovely bride is here as well. You have to come get a hug too. You're in the, it's a family thing.
Get you with
We would love for you to.
First, let me thank the board for having me here tonight. I appreciate that. First thing I want to say is I appreciate the support that this board and past boards have given to JCSA through the years. We couldn't have done those projects without your support, your leadership, your funding, even through the tough years, to do what we have done. So I wanted to take that time to thank you personally for that. I also wanted to say, I wanted to thank Doug and Mr. Powell and Stephanie Luton, who is here tonight, as well as Danny Poe for joining me with the leadership at JCSA. I've really appreciated their camaraderie, support, advice, being able to bounce ideas off. It's been a wonderful experience for me. And I also wanted to mention the staff at JCSA. I got to give the kudos to them. I've seen nights where it was literally raining, and I've seen nights when sleet is blowing sideways, and they're out making repairs to ensure that services are restored for our customers. And they do it all the time. I've even seen them do it on Thanksgiving. They leave their own homes to go and fix services for other customers. And it's just phenomenal to see that and to see their attitude. And lastly, thank my bride. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything to offer? Michael, I know you did.
For everything.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for everything you've done for the county.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. All right, next on our agenda is public comment. We do have a speaker this evening, Ms. Beverly Oglesby. You get up if you wouldn't mind giving your name, stating your name and address, please.
My name's Beverly Oglesby. I live at 4441 Powhatan Crossing, which is in the Berkeley C district, I think. I'm here because of something that happened last week, but hopefully something can come of this. So I had a water main break, big water main break, and I received my bill. So I went back on my records for a year. On average, I use about 6,000 gallons per quarter. And the bill that I got was for 49,000 gallons in a quarter. So that's roughly, on average, about 20,000 more gallons that I use in a year. Despite that, we're not here to talk about that. But what I was wondering is, James City County got a whole webpage, a site on their webpage dedicated to water conservation. And I thought, okay, it's not just me. I have 3 neighbors in my neighborhood alone also dealing with water main breaks right now within 2 weeks, on top of a sinkhole, which is the 4th neighbor. And I thought, okay, we're only getting billed per quarter. That's 3 months. So if the water main broke in October, I didn't know it until 3 months later. So how could, I be responsible for it, meaning the water conservation? Because if I don't know about it until 3 months later, I've already wasted over 30,000 gallons of water that was not used. Now you multiply that by 3 more households in my neighborhood alone. So I was wondering if there was a way that there could be an alert, if they're not going to bill monthly. If I knew the very first month, I would know by far I've used 12,000 more gallons than I normally do in a month. So we don't bill monthly. That would be nice. But if they don't choose to do that, is there a way that there's a technical way they could send out an alert? Say, hey, did you mean to use 10 times the normal amount that you normally do on an average? Our credit cards do. Did you mean to spend $9,000 at Walmart? No, I haven't been in Sarasota, Florida. But there should be a way, an application, a program, something out there that could alert us that something's off. Because that would benefit not only me and my bill and the repair bill, but it would also benefit the authority in water. That I'm not wasting 30,000 gallons of water in a quarter that I didn't mean to. And you would think, which was my misconception, that oh, with 30,000 gallons, you're going to see it in your yard, you're going to have a wet spot. That's not the case. I live on an incline, and I was told also that there's a sandy layer underneath, so all the water went down. I never saw a wet spot in my yard. So, and I don't go and look at my meter. I don't do that. I don't know what day that they round and look at the meter. I don't know if they reset the meter. I'm very naive in that part, but I figured if there was some way, they could alert us. If they're not going to bill us monthly, it would benefit both of us, both sides.
Typically, we don't respond after public comment, but since you're the only one here today, and Mr. Powell has graciously accepted the responsibility of responding to your concerns, and thank you for being here, by the way.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, Ms. Oglesby, thank you. A couple things. If you were not aware, you can apply for an adjustment to your bill because you had a leak. So that's one thing. But I think more importantly, to your point, I am happy to say that we are on the verge of converting to monthly billing. We're currently scheduled to begin monthly billing in May.
Great.
So we have just recently completed a project in which we have replaced all of our customers' meters with what are called radio read meters, so we can read the meters more quickly. And so we are converting to monthly billing, and that conversion should occur within the next few months.
Great. But yes, I did apply for the credit, and I was told I couldn't because they only apply, you can only have one credit per 3 years. And I had one 2 years and some change. So I can't. And okay. The second thing is bill pay. So I learned this part today. On your bill, it says, you can pay at locations. You can go to your local location, and you can pay your bill. So I went to the Tuning Road location, and they informed me they do not take cards, debit or credit. I'm in the generation, I don't carry cash, I don't carry checks. I mean, my phone and my cards are everything. So I thought maybe they could find a way, if the craft people at a fair on a Saturday can get a square, can't we get something, get the locations? And then secondly, she gave me the 844 number to call. You could pay it over the phone. So I get in the parking lot and I start the 5-minute automated process, and it declines. I know I have the funds in the bank, and so I tried again another way. It declines me again. So then I spend another 10 minutes with HRUBs trying to get through to a human being, and she tells me, oh, you can't process anything over $1,000. That I would have to make it in 2 separate call-ins. So if I've just spent 48,000 gallons in water, I'd like to pay it. I can't, because now I have to divide it out in a 20-minute and divide the amounts out, because it won't process anything over $1,000. And I assure you, 48,000 gallons is over $1,000. So if we could have a way to get, a way to accept cards at the locations, and secondly, if we do call in, to at least have the automated machine say, hey, we're going to decline it because it's over the amount.
So I hate to tell you, but your time is up for
I'm
today.
sorry.
But Mr. Powell, we've taken notes on your items, so maybe you can leave your phone number with, if Teresa's out front or if somebody is out there, that would be great. That way we can give you a call.
All right,
All right,
thanks.
thank you for
Have a
being
good-
here. Any other speakers? I don't believe so. All right, next is the consent calendar. We have the minutes adoption and the resolution of appreciation for Michael Vergakis that we just read to him. Do I have a motion?
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're good. Any public hearings?
No, ma'am.
We're all good. Board considerations?
Well, I'm sorry, board considerations you're going to do.
We're going to do.
Yeah, so I'll
in-
wait till board requests.
We will, yes, we'll
Okay.
do the work session in the work session room.
Okay, and that's under the
Under-
rate study?
right.
The rate,
Oh, okay.
So, board requests, directives?
Well, so I thought there were some valid points brought forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand about the every 3 years, but if it's something out of your control, like a water main break, as you know, Mr. Powell, I myself have experienced this very same thing. And I also had no water coming up, so, you know, you don't know. And so how did we get into the every 3 years before you could have an adjustment? And is there any exceptions ever made to that? And that, you don't have to answer that today, and then I do think it is a very valid point about the credit cards, because I know my kids, my son, no, they don't operate with, they don't even have they don't have checks. So, which just seems so foreign to me, but I get it. So have we thought about putting in a card reader at our locations, or?
It is something that we have discussed, you know, and actually Mr. McGlynn and I talked about this just a few days ago. There's when you take a credit card, there's a fee.
Right.
So we would have to make a decision whether we'll absorb that fee or whether we pass that fee along to the customer. So there is that disadvantage. It's a more costly transaction.
Sure.
But I do think, you know, they do accept credit cards at other county locations, and I can see where it'd be a frustration to the customer to not know, you know, if there's an inconsistency in where it's accepted and where it isn't. So
Yeah.
it's something that we can look at again.
Okay. And then if you could just let me know about the every 3 years
Sure.
thing, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Now, I know in the county, we changed it several years ago that we let the customer cover the fee of the charge. And so that may be, you know, to stay consistent with what the county's doing, it may be something you want to consider as well. You know, that we tell them ahead of time, if you're going to use a card, it's going to be a X percent more onto it. Thank you.
Else? So I'm guessing, do you want to do your update now and then we'll recess?
Sure, and the only update that I had is, as Mr. Vergakis retires, I wanted to announce that we have hired Mike Ushak to be the senior water engineer. I think most of you probably know Mike. Mike's been our civil engineer in our water section for about 3 years now, and he will formally take over that position on February 1st.
Congratulations to him.
Do we need a motion to recess?
I guess you should recess, yes.
So we need a motion for that?
Move to recess.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
We are recessed. Meeting, James City Service Authority, Board of Directors, back into order.
Okay.
Mr. Tuck.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The James City Service Authority has a financial policy that requires a comprehensive rate analysis update every 5 years. Your last rate study was done in 2015, so therefore 2020, it's time for another one. The study that will be presented today does recommend some changes, but overall, I would consider the proposals to be relatively minor to reflect our own local usage patterns and to adhere to some industry best practices. Mr. Andy Burnham is Vice President and Director of Financial Management Consulting with Stantec, and Mr. Kyle Stevens is Senior Consultant with Stantec. These two gentlemen were part of Burton and Associates that did the study in 2015. So they're very familiar with the Service Authority, and we've had a very long-standing now, very positive and productive relationship with these two gentlemen. And I will turn it over to Mr. Burnham for the presentation.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome. Thank
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and go through the 5-year rate study update with you. So we've been able to consolidate a normally very complex process down to about 15 slides for you to bring it up to some key high-level information points and also decision points for you. So without much further ado, I'd like to kind of start getting into it. As Doug had mentioned, the financial services group at Stantec largely has its roots in Burton and Associates. In fact, it was an acquisition of Stantec's a couple of years ago. And so there's over 40 of us in the group that specialize in really almost nothing but exclusively utility financial management and rate setting for government enterprises. And so we've got an extensive number of folks with literally hundreds of years of experience, and we've done thousands of these studies, not only in the Commonwealth, but across the country. So a great benefit of ours is being able to bring in a lot of different perspectives and best practices, as Doug mentioned, to the appropriate circumstances here in James City County. So the last study, as Doug mentioned, that was completed in 2015 by Kyle and I as Burton and Associates. And I think many of you may recall actually from that study that when we started that process, the water system hadn't had a rate adjustment since 2009. So it's been about 7 years almost on the water side. And the level of investment needs for that system, it showed it. And so this board and this agency made a tough decision to make a 13.5% increase in water rates for 5 years. The sewer system had a more recent adjustment. It was in 2013. There was a rate increase done at that time. And so for sewer, there was actually no immediate increase identified in 2016, but then in 17, 18, 19, and this year we're now, there was a 2% adjustment identified for sewer, much more modest. But an important element of that study was a rate structure evaluation, looking at your tier sizes, your pricing for your inclining block rate structure, and also a strong conversation about the merits of and implementation of quarterly fixed fees for customer-related and readiness to serve related costs. And so those were two key elements of that study as well. And so I just wanted to bring that up for a little bit of a relevant perspective about what the last study entailed and recommended as we move into the current study here. So this study is really focusing on three key elements, and I'm going to break the presentation down into a couple slides on each. The first real question is how much money does James City Service Authority need to meet its operating capital, reserve, and debt requirements over a 5 and 10-year projection period? The next question is, how do we collect that through our rate structure, through the number and size of tiers that we have, through fixed charges, through usage rates for various customer classes? And how do we also recover our growth-related capacity costs associated with expanding infrastructure, building infrastructure to meet the demands of new or redevelopment? And so I'd like to take each of those elements and break them down, first starting with the revenue sufficiency part of the scope. And so I think before we start looking at what those projections are for the next 5 and 10 years for the James City Service Authority, both water and sewer separately, it's important to make sure we're on the same page about some of the key assumptions and data points going into it. And so we've reflected a lot of your financial policies in this process, specifically funding at least 20% of the annual capital improvement plan budget with operating revenues or cash, and to minimize our reliance on facility fees, those capacity charges from growth and development. We also want to make sure we maintain adequate reserve levels equal to the average of the last 3 years' total expenses. And we also want to make sure that we minimize rate increases to the greatest extent possible and not set ourselves up for potentially double-digit increases or periodic rate spikes. We want to try to have rate increases as low as possible for as long as possible without creating some pent-up needs or rate pressure in the future that's going to lead to some really challenging conversations. We don't want to find ourselves where we were a few years ago having to look at double-digit rate increases for the utilities. And so we've also integrated the current capital improvement needs for the authority over the 10-year time period. You can see it's almost $30 million for the sewer system and about $50 million for water. And a big part of that are, estimates and allowances for additional capital for alternative water supplies into the future. We've tried to make as reasonable estimates as we can on that in close consultation with Doug and his team to try to reflect that based upon what we know today. But the amount of water supply needs, the timing of it, the source of it, those are all things that are going to evolve as you continue to move into the future. And as you acquire better information, you will have to make sure you consider that in the adequacy of your 5-year financial plans that you adopt for water. We have continued to reflect in our baseline forecast continued decreases in per capita water use. If you look back to 2010, your average use per equivalent residential connection was about 7,200 gallons a month. That's now down to, just in 2019, about 5,200 gallons. So you had about a 27% reduction in average use per equivalent connection. It's been slowing down the last few years, but, and I'll get to some of this in a little bit, the current standards for new water efficiencies are even lower than what your current average use is. So we're continuing to assume some modest reductions in water use as part of the forecast going forward.
Will you be sending us a copy of this PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
thanks.
I was wondering that too. Thank you.
And we also want to make sure that we have the system renewal and replacement adequately funded and thought about in our future planning. So we've included what we've identified and escalated that for future year costs as best we can. And that's an important part of the process, is making sure that we're cash funding those renewal and replacement needs. And so we went through with these key assumptions and data points, financial models that really have been set up since the last rate study that simulate under different scenarios and stress test levels of growth, assumed water demands, what's the adequacy of our current rates to meet those requirements, and what do we need to do in terms of adjustments, if necessary, to meet our identified capital needs over the near term and long term. And so we've included a couple of screenshots of where we've landed on this process, and wanted to highlight a few things for you. So the first is that we always look at the status quo and perform kind of a diagnostic evaluation to say, based upon assumed growth, your current rates and those revenues from the fees and charges you have today, your identified operating costs and capital needs, with reasonable inflation, are your current rates adequate to meet your identified needs? And for the water system, they were not. In fact, if we kept rates flat over the 10-year time plan horizon, we'd have about an $8.2 million deficit by the end of the 10-year time period. So those bars would actually go negative by 2030. And so what we looked at were alternative plans of adjustments for the system. And as you can see on the chart below, we do not have any rate increase identified for next fiscal year 21. However, starting in fiscal year 22, we do have 3.5% increases that are intended to levelize the needs of the system. There's some longer term capital investments anticipated for alternative water supply that, again, in keeping with some of those assumptions and objectives of having moderate and low rate increases, a 3.5% plan would allow us to have a balanced cash flow. If you look at that right chart, where our revenues are matching our expenses, some years they're less, some years they're more, but it generally puts us in a position where we should have a balanced cash flow trajectory and a little bit of flexibility to deal with the uncertainty of future water supply costs for the system. And again, it's always a recommendation of ours to continue to look at the financial performance annually to take into account any notable changes. So if you have more clarity on alternative water supply costs, if you see some big changes in your customer base or demands, new regulatory requirements come in, this model's been a part of your financial planning and budget process, shepherded by Doug and Stephanie, that you can take those considerations into the model and see what the impacts are to your financial plan. And so I think that's going to be a key component going forward. But based upon what we know today and all the stress tests we've run, this is the plan that we think makes the most sense for you to consider at this point, subject to those periodic reviews. For the sewer system, the challenge here will be trying to manage an intelligent and reasonable use of the reserves that you have for the system for your expected capital needs. So those reserves have been built up in anticipation of spending on your infrastructure needs. And we want to make sure that we use those reserves for that purpose, but do so in a way that we don't create a significant cash flow deficit at the end of the time period where we've used those reserves up. So if you look at that bottom right chart, revenues versus expenses, that orange line of cash out, you can see it's exceeding the cash coming into the system over time, and that's what's providing for that gradual use of reserves. We're going to have to be very mindful and manage that use of reserves for capital spending and make sure that we're not funding recurring needs with cash reserves, because that's a non-recurring source. Once we've used that cash down, we still have similar levels of capital spending beyond this time period. We're going to have to elevate rates to cover that. But for this foreseeable 5-year period from 21 to 25, we think the current rates are adequate to meet your needs in conjunction with the anticipated use of those reserves based on the capital plan that we have now. And it does give us some room if some things come up that we may have to draw those reserves down a little bit sooner, but we could do so without having to go to rates during that time period. So we're not recommending any near-term adjustments on sewer rates at this time.
But in 2025, we may have to look at that as far as, so we don't need to weigh out our reserves over time.
Exactly, and you'll want to take into account at that point what you know. There may be new regulatory requirements. You may have new information about your infrastructure needs. The construction cost market may change, so the cost of your infrastructure may increase or decrease depending upon if we're in a recession. So that would definitely be a great point to check how you're progressing, even potentially before that, to make sure that you're not using up your reserves too quickly.
Correct.
And setting yourselves up for an unwanted rate increase above inflationary levels.
Now, back on the slide before, what is a spike at 2026?
So that's some anticipated capital for alternative water supply.
Okay,
It's
that's
one of
what I
those
thought.
cost assumptions that we've put in now
For the 27.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Our-
exactly.
Our groundwater withdrawal permit expires in 27, and so there's some assumptions that we're going to have to spend some money prior to that to prepare.
That's what I
These
figured it was.
these are projections and
Right.
estimates. Those timelines could shift.
Yep.
As I mentioned on Saturday, our permit doesn't require that we actually have something online by 2027, but that
Right.
we should have a plan.
A plan in place.
But for the purposes of the study, we had to make some assumptions.
Right.
So
That's what I
the
thought it
assumption
was.
is that spike is to fund some capital projects associated with a alternative water source.
Yeah, and that capital number too is an important reason why we want to have the reserves a little bit above that minimum planning target.
Right.
Because if that capital cost that's several years down the road, if there's a 20% or 25% increase in that, that's a couple $1 million that we would have to come up with. And so having some resources to be able to respond to that potential sensitivity is a good thing to have.
Right.
To be able to do.
And at the last plan, that was noted, and we took things in and put them into place, because we noted if we continue like we're going, we wouldn't be in the position we're in today. We'd be further behind the 8 ball than where we are now. So
Exactly.
it's a good plan that, what we did before and now what we're doing now, in order to make sure that we're able to meet our needs and have a little cushion in the bank for those just in case.
Yeah. I mean, of the two systems, the water system versus sewer system, it feels like there's a lot more uncertainty and financial risk on the water side.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's, again, kind of why we landed at making this recommendation for your consideration, to leave yourselves a little bit of flexibility on the water side.
I think it's smart. Thank you.
So that's where we landed on the revenue sufficiency analyses for both of the systems. The next part of the analysis we looked at was a diagnostic evaluation of your existing rate structure. And first and foremost, we want to make sure that you understand that your current rates do conform with industry practices. And I tend to agree and appreciate Doug's characterization of what we're talking about here as enhancements to what you have. They're really not significant changes. In fact, we're not recommending any rate structure changes to sewer at all through this review. And it's really just more really reflecting current usage profiles. So when we talked about rate structure a few years ago and looked at the sizing of indoor water use, that was based on then current information, about 70 gallons a day. Now that's down to about 50 gallons a day. And so our tier sizing, when we think about indoor use for a normal family and larger family, we really should be calibrating those tiers to reflect current usage profiles. And so that's really, I think, the biggest enhancement that we were talking about. That, again, is consistent with what we want to do as an objective, is make sure we're reflecting industry best practices in our own local usage profiles and patterns, where As I mentioned, we've seen about a 27% reduction in usage per account over the past 10 years. And so we should size our tiers around our observed usage patterns and profiles. But we also still want to provide conservation pricing and signals at high levels of usage. And we also want to make sure that we keep in mind revenue stability, especially as we move into situations where we're looking at alternative water supplies. Having some revenue stability will be helpful in case we do have to go issue debt for the system at some point in the future. Having fiscal stability will be important to the rating agencies as part of that process.
And that's important.
So, but before I get into a couple of the specific changes, the last bullet point is also something I want to make sure that you all appreciate is that term revenue neutral. On the two financial panels that we showed you, there were no revenue increases for water or for sewer in 2021. So all this analysis is looking at is a restructuring of your rates, and it's not intended to collect any additional revenue or expected to generate any additional revenue for the authority in 21. And so that was another reason why when looking at those plans, we wanted to look at indexing starting in fiscal year 22, not 21, so that you could see very transparently the impact of these minor rate structure modifications and know that it's really not intended to generate any additional revenue. It's just restructuring of the rates to reflect the current information that we have now.
Okay.
So one of the enhancements was relative to the level of the fixed fees for the water system. Fixed charges are a very common practice for utilities. In fact, the few utilities out there, I would say, this is anecdotal, but there's some survey evidence that will support it. I'd say about less than 5% of the utilities, public utilities, don't have fixed charges. 95% of utilities have fixed charges to cover a portion of their fixed costs. And it goes back to just the prior point that I made about the rating agencies wanting some fixed cost stability and fixed cost recovery. In fact, Fitch has targeted, for the best, medium, and the lower rated utilities, how much revenue is collected in their fixed charges. And it's about 10%, 20%, or 30% or more. So they use that as actually a criteria in evaluating the creditworthiness of utilities. And so they view higher revenue collection in those fixed charges as a good thing in terms of stabilizing your revenue collection. If you have declines in demand, you still have revenue to come in to cover some of those fixed costs, like your debt service payments, cover some of your staffing costs that are fixed regardless of volume. And so there are some very positive elements to having those fixed charges. So for just the water system alone, today, the fixed charges that you have that you can see on the left column of that table on the right, represent about 11% of your water system revenues. But when you look at your water system costs, about 88% of your costs are fixed. And so this is very common for utility systems to have fixed cost ratios of about 80 to 90% of their costs are fixed. Really, the only variable things ultimately come down to things like chemicals, electricity, maybe some fuel, unless they have some significant amounts of purchased water expenses. So most of the times we'll see ratios in that 80 to 90% range, but yet we only collect about 10% of our revenues in fixed charges. So, but there's reasons for that. We also want to have conservation pricing to our customers. So it's about finding balance and making sure we have adequate reserves to measure some of our risk and mitigate some of it, having some level of fixed cost recovery, but also finding the best balance of conservation pricing for us that works. So we're recommending a modest increase in that fixed cost recovery from 11% to 15% of the total water revenues. In the next periodic study that you do, maybe it would be good to continue to move that up towards 20%, taking modest steps. I think that'll be a good thing to reflect upon as you have more clarity on what the costs are for future water supplies, and if you do have to access the credit markets, because they would view having 20% of your revenue recovery in fixed fees as a good thing as part of that process. So
that's what I was going to ask. For bonding for what we're looking at, possibly borrowing in the future for water needs, we're better off with a 20%.
It would move it up into the mid-range category. The 15 and below is kind of the bottom level category. Just on this criteria, they have a lot of criteria.
Right.
So,
but just as one, but each one adds to the next, and
exactly.
Make sure that with our triple bond rating, we don't lose any of that in this process. That we basically are strengthening that capability as we go to borrow in the future for any water needs.
So moving up to 20% would enhance that. That rating. So as we do that, though, the last sentence on the slide, the result is that because this is revenue neutral, if we increase the level of the fixed charges, that means the usage rates will come down slightly because it's a zero-sum game. We want to collect the same overall level of revenue. So again, this is an enhancement or a very modest adjustment that we're proposing here because of that very dynamic, and we want to continue to have conservation pricing as well. So related to the conservation pricing, we have looked at your tier structure, and we just wanted to look at modernizing it based upon current usage profiles. So the 50.7 gallons per day is the most current evidence of indoor water use from National Utility Survey that was conducted just a couple of years ago. And it's actually come down from 70 gallons to about 50. If you look at the current plumbing codes and if every home had current code compliant fixtures for low flow devices, both toilets, dishwashing appliances, clothes washers, etc., that actually is less than 40 gallons a day is what the current development code standard is. So all new homes should be going in with all those fixtures that are code compliant, and that use per person from those fixtures should be about 40 gallons a day. So, but this is the current national average now. And it tends to bear out pretty well with your billing data when we look at the distribution of your bills. That overall for your service area, that seems to be pretty reflective of indoor water use for an average size household at 2.5 people. Again, the half person is the census data.
And unless you have a teenager in the shower.
Yeah, unless you have a teenager in the shower, then it may feel like you have more like 5 people in the house. So yeah, that third person could make it feel like you have 5, in which case we double the amount of water use, and that would be the basis of tier 2. We are recommending a consideration of an additional tier. And so actually Kyle did a fair amount of analysis of your GIS data to look at lot sizes, how much of the typical parcel size is actually landscaped area, and using complicated agricultural formulas for how much water different types of grass need in different environmental conditions. Considering seasonality and beneficial rainfall, the typical lot needs about 4,000 gallons of irrigation in the community. So we're recommending that as a tier 3, and then everything above that would be tier 4. So how this relates to what you have today, this is shown here with kind of these little line charts. So the blue represents these proposed tiers that I just went over and the rates, and the orange line represents the current tier. So your current tier 1, it goes from 0 to 5,000 gallons. But again, that was based on the 70 gallons a day per person from a few years ago. The new tier 1 is based on the 50 gallons a day, and the rate is 362. It's a little bit lower because again, we have slightly higher fixed charges. The tier 2 was from 6 to 10,000 gallons at 819. Again, for using that same indoor water use standard, that would be from 5 to 8,000 gallons. And then the tier 3 would be at 1316. That would go from 9 to 12, that 4,000 gallons for irrigation for a typical property. And then everything above 12,000 gallons, which today is everything above 10,000 gallons, would be at $20.40. So that fourth tier rate is actually a little bit higher than what your current tier 3 rate is at $19.24.
But this would help probably some of our larger families.
It would.
As far as being able to save and how much water they're using and consuming.
Because the proposed second tier is lower than the current second tier.
Right.
At least if you stay under 8,000 gallons a month, a large family would actually have would benefit from
A little
this.
benefit from it.
Right.
Yeah. And then it depends too where that large family falls in. You know, if it's 5 people or if it's 6, you know, if they're using say 12,000 gallons a month, well now that tier 3 rate is 1316, whereas they were already getting into that tier 3 rate that was 1924. So because you could see some larger families in that 8 to 12,000 gallon range pretty easily if they've got some teenagers and some younger folks in there. So
they could still be getting all the work.
They could still be, and so that's the benefit of that third tier is it's kind of a little bit more of a bridge for larger families and for reasonable irrigation before just getting right into that tier 3 very high rate, what was 1924, which is now to 2040.
And I think with going to our monthly plan, it's going to be, you're going to be able to budget a little better.
Oh, monthly billing's going to be so fantastic.
It is, because they're going to be able to look at that and go, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on?
Exactly.
Why is this one, because everybody looks at Vepco and they compare it to last year, where they were at, how much they're paying. And so they're going to tend to do the same thing with our water.
Yep.
As far as looking at that and going, hey, we need to gate this back a little bit.
Exactly. And they'll have a chance to, because with quarterly billing, you could almost get out of season. You get the bill for the last quarter, which is the summer irrigation season. You're like, oh, you want to make adjustments? Well, you've already turned off your irrigation because you're into fall, beginning of winter already. So, yeah, that feedback and that ability to make adjustments sooner is, I think, going to be really helpful for the consumer.
Was this based on monthly, or was this based on quarterly?
So we used your quarterly data,
Okay.
but estimated the monthly distribution and then included price elasticity allowances for some of those types of dynamics where people might contract.
So we're talking 4,000 gallons that's
Per month.
Per month.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. 'Cause
I'm just looking at at one of my invoices to see
How you
that's-
fitting in there?
all right. I see.
Yeah, I think I'm fitting. I was freaking out, but now I'm not, because I think I'm gonna fall into
Without-
tier 1.
Yes.
Without irrigation, I'm definitely in tier 1, because I think mine was about 8,000, never more than about 9,000 for a quarter. So
Oh, wow.
you're
So-
only talking about 3,000.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up irrigation when we get to it.
If you could
I'll
get cable,
plant
your
weeds
kids
and
wouldn't
get
be
a
in the
gun.
shower so much.
That's right. I time them. Dad, I still got soap.
I got an arrangement with the Lord. I put it in the ground and He waters it.
That's right. Amen.
So we think the adjustments are pretty well founded based on the data that we're seeing. And they're not wholesale changes to what you have. They're really kind of in the neighborhood of improvements or enhancements that I think are going to help some consumers that maybe are on the cusp, and in tandem with monthly billing, I think this is going to be really beneficial for your customers.
Yeah.
So, and the results of these impacts are very modest. So it depends on how much water you use. And again, this is all revenue neutral, but 0 to 3,000 gallons, those low bills are about the same, a little bit less. 5,000 gallons, it's a little bit more. I mean, you have to look at each individual monthly bill, and not every customer uses the same amount or every month or will. So you're going to see some ups and downs, but they're generally very comparable bills. If you look at the deltas here, it's very similar. And again, that's because they're modest changes.
Okay, I'll take it.
We did do some updated rate surveys for you as well, just to compare to really the other Hampton Roads communities. And so we've identified water and sewer bills for 5,000 gallons for residential customer with a 5/8 inch meter. So currently it's that 4205. The proposed rate structure change for that bill would be 4384. If everybody used 5,000 gallons every month, which it's not, it's going to go up and down a little bit. So some months it's going to be lower and they'd see a reduction on that bill. You still see how you stack up. And this chart is very comparable to the one we did 5 years ago, in terms of you were outside of, Williamsburg that just has water service, of those that had water and sewer service, you were the lowest. And even with the proposed changes then, you were still going to be the lowest. And here we are today. You're still,
We're still alone.
still the lowest. Yes, ma'am. The last thing I have for you are just a couple slides on the facility fees. So these are the charges that are applied to growth and development that's intended to really cover the cost of your system capacity that's needed to serve growth. So there's kind of a mantra associated with it in terms of, growth, paying for growth related costs. And so you currently assess system facility fees for your backbone infrastructure, and then local facility fees for localized infrastructure. Like, say, if you have to put in distribution lines in a neighborhood or in a development, you would charge a local systems or a local facility fee to cover and defray those types of costs. But your backbone costs, like your treatment plants, your big transmission lines, or big interceptors or forest mains, those are what's captured in those system facility costs. That third bullet, I was pretty kind with that. So the fees have been in place for a number of years. So Stephanie helped me do some research on this. So you apply for residential customers a fee that's per bathroom fixture. Those were last updated in 2009. You have a 5/8 inch non-residential fee. That was updated in 1997. You have a 3/4 inch non-residential fee that was updated in 1998. The 1-inch fee was updated in 1990. That's 30 years ago, just for a frame of reference. And then everything that's 1.5 inch to 6 inches was updated in 1987 for your system facility charges, and your local facility charges have not been updated since 1989. So that's just kind of for a talking point for you, is that these have not been evaluated really in a long time. Some elements have been maybe a little bit more recent than others, but the newest component was looked at over 10 years ago. The oldest was looked at 30 years ago. So just managing some expectations on this, because these numbers are going to look pretty different because of the passage of time and changes in cost. So the residential won't look as different because that was updated at least 10 years ago, but some of these others are 20 and 30 years ago. So that's really one of the biggest things, is we wanted to update these fees to reflect your current unit cost, but then also simplify the structure and just use meter size, because you have this kind of an interesting situation where you use bathroom fixtures for residential, but meter size for everything else. The far and away the most common industry practice is to just use meter size. It's readily available data. You don't have to collect something outside of meter inventory that you're normally going to have anyway as part of operating utility. And so we're recommending you just convert to using meter size for everybody as part of the process. And I think staff will love you for that if you were able to pursue that.
I want staff to love that.
So this table shows the updates. We have the current system facilities fee on the left-hand column. The top chart is water, the bottom is sewer, and we have the current local facility fee next to it. And then we have the calculated system facilities fee and the calculated local facilities fee. And so you can see for a 5/8 inch residential on water, it's actually a little bit lower, but the sewer is higher. And again, those are the ones that were updated most recently, about 10 years ago. But the others, you'll see some pretty notable increases on those because it's been 20 to 30 years or 3/4, 1 inch, all the way up to the 6 inch since they were last updated. So we wanted to highlight this for you. These are some substantial changes in the levels of the fees that are overdue. If you look at some of the impacts of this for residential, it's going to be relatively pretty consistent with what they have. And I've got a survey that I'll show you. It's the non-residential that you could see some pretty large impacts because some of those fee increases were substantial. But in some cases, you could see actual reductions. So we actually did a group home. This is from some actual data. So we grabbed the number of bathroom fixtures, number of meters, so that we could find out for actual recent examples that you've had come in that have paid your system facility charges, what would they pay with these new fees versus what did they actually pay when they came in recently. And so you can see a convenience store and a drugstore that, those would be about double. And that's consistent with what we showed on those fee tables, is that those fee differences were about double. But the group home would actually be a little bit less because it wouldn't be based on bathroom fixtures. It would be based on meter size. So we ran a few different samples of these. Some are up, some are down. It's hard to say what the revenue impacts of this will be. We think it'll be about neutral based on the development mix that we would see, maybe a slight positive, but it's hard to say. We don't know exactly what development's going to happen where over the next few years in those facilities.
Can I ask you to go back one slide real quick? I had a question
Sure.
about when you're talking about meter size and you have water and sewer there. Most residential is 5/8. I mean, how large meter size is the largest you'd find on maybe a residential connection in a county?
If we have any that are over 5/8, it's a very small number.
Very small
I think we have a handful of large houses that have more than 5/8.
But nothing,
Vast majority
nothing like the 1, 2, or 3 inch line for example. Okay, so most of that is going to be associated with non-residential.
Yes, sir.
And then if you're looking at something like a 6-inch main, that must obviously be something like, I don't know what the brewery actually has down there, but it's probably. I figure it's at least a 6-inch main or something for their water use.
That would be a really big hotel, like a convention center, one of those types of line sizes. There's not many on the system.
So really, at the top end of that, we really have very, very few that would be.
That's correct. We only have in the system currently. We only have a handful that are in that 6 inch or larger range.
But and the other part of this too is depending on the number of meters too. So it's not just the size, but some properties may have like a non-residential property may have a meter for the office building, a meter for, if it's a commercial strip center, they may have a meter for each one of the different centers. So it's a function of the number and the size of the meters too. So that comes up sometimes. For like apartment complexes, they'll usually have like a meter for building. So if it's like an 8-unit building, each one will have their own meter. So they would pay for each one of the meters.
So that you don't think that the cost will be passed down to your beer prices. Reminder that they're on Newport News.
Water.
So communication, should this go through, is going to be the key.
Right. And of course, this will only apply to new developments.
Correct.
Yeah, but yes.
Yeah, but even still.
Right.
Because, but I mean, long past due.
Yes.
Long past due. So.
Just out of curiosity, why is the drugstore such a high cost compared to the convenience store?
Yeah, Kyle can look that one up. It might be the fact that they had to pay the local facility fees and the convenience store didn't. So it depends on what lines you're connecting to, and it could be the meter size. Big meter. Yeah, Kyle can look it up. But these are based on some specific examples that had come in through the development process, and so Kyle just pulled their attributes, number and size of meters, and reran the numbers based upon.
Did you do any on residential? Just a single residential?
Yeah, so we have actually here just the survey. So the majority of the residential, if it's in a development, the developer is going to build that local distribution lines and the sewer collection lines, so they won't pay the local facility fees. So just on the system facility fees, it's actually going to be less if it's a 5/8 meter. So 7,200 to 6,800. Remember that water fee went down. Recall. So.
Because right now we're not getting anything on. We're getting it all on how many fixtures you have, but not on the wastewater side really, compared to what we're doing as far as water.
Well, a toilet is a fixture.
Right.
But yes, it's based on fixtures.
Right. Yeah. So it's this way we're going to divide it, and basically we're going to have the meter, and then we'll have the water meter and the sewer metered. So instead of like what we've had before, it's one covers all, we're separating those out. And so what does that do as far as cost? How does that equal out to a cost now? Because I know some of them have, some of them have their meter for water, but they're on septic. So we're serving their water, but not their sewer. And then everything's considered on a lot of the properties. You're using this much volume of water, and X amount you're thinking is going into the sewer. But so we're going to have on the new buildings a meter on sewer and a meter on water.
It's still just 1 meter.
Still just one meter.
Just 1 meter.
Even though we're going to pull it out as 2.
Right.
And act like there's 2, but it'll still be 1 meter.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be good to avoid redundant
Yeah.
metering infrastructure. If you
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I was wondering how's that going to, blend, because, we're right now just gauging X amount of water's going into our sewer. Where, if somebody's watering their grass or washing their car or whatever, and maybe going on the ground, we're figuring, okay, maybe 20%, I don't know what the exact number is, but maybe 20% is going into sewer.
Yeah, that return factor.
Right. Okay.
But so again, this is largely for single family homes that are happening as part of new developments where the developers are putting in the local infrastructure. This is really not an impact to them. It's really going to be the non-residential, non-single family residential that would see it. And then if single family homes were happening outside of developments, the fees would be a little bit higher because those local infrastructure costs, those are the ones from 1989. Those unit costs are a little bit higher. So if it's not in a development and the developer's not contributing it, that all-in system facility fee plus the local fee would be a little bit higher. But for those that are happening in developments, it's actually a tiny bit less for single-family homes. So. That's all I got for you.
The study on sprinkler systems is always, I have no problem with anyone who wants to, have a beautiful lawn. I love them. I think they're great. I think they look beautiful. They add to the home and all that. And but to put drinking water on a lawn is kind of crazy to me. And, but a lot of people, that's what they want. And I'm fine with that. That's okay, because that's what makes us what we are. We're all different. But I think if you're going to take the most valuable resource we have and put it on grass, which to me, water is gold, and you're going to put it on grass, then there ought to be a fee for that larger than your regular water fee. Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to get slammed by some people, but, that's just my opinion, and I've always been able to tell it. I'm not against anybody watering, and I think if they want to water, that's great. But I think there ought to be a higher fee if we're doing everything we need to do to this water to get it to that meter, mm-hmm. and it's drinkable, and you're putting it on grass, then it should be a higher rate than the water you're having in the house to mm-hmm. keep you alive.
Yeah, and that's exactly the rationale behind the tiered system. So if you think about those first two tiers, those rates are very low. I've got it back on the screen. It's $362 for tier 1 and then $658 for tier 2, which could be outdoor irrigation for a smaller household, but it could be indoor use for a larger family. Then when you get to tier 3, that $13.16, that's now 4 times that indoor rate. And if you look at the tier 4 rate at $20, that's about 6 times that indoor rate. So this conservation pricing structure that you have, that is also the most aggressive in the Hampton Roads area. So if you look at like Suffolk and others, the highest rate for that top tier, what was it, Kyle? $12, I think?
I think we're right, 13 if you round it right in there.
$12.98, I think is what we found. And so your top tier rate's at $20. So
I'll tell you, it works because even under the old current system right now, when I had 1 quarter when I would get bumping up toward tier 3, when I would irrigate in that 1 quarter. And what I found was I would very carefully measure how much was put out, how much time, and I would set my sprinkler system, try to keep myself under, right, from going into that top tier. And I think that this new 3-tier, 4-tier system would be perfect because what it would tell me is that I would very definitely, when I got to 12,000, I'm going to have the meter set to, okay, we'll shut it down for right now because it's just not worth it when you get into that higher end of the thing.
Yeah, the pricing, you're right. The pricing differential is the key to that exact point that you're making, is that the higher that price differential is, the more you have something that will catch their attention. You'll see the change on the bill, and it will cause a reaction and hopefully result in the behavior that we want. That's more careful with the resource and doing some of the things.
And I think going to monthly billing will help as well too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. That really will help
because people can now have that feedback, like we were talking about before, to say, "Wow, I saw this jump from this month to the next. It's time to dial down the irrigation system because it's really affecting my pocketbook."
Yeah. Hey, Doug, I'm sorry. I think part of this conversation needs to translate over to the HOAs who require you to have these lovely lush lawns. Because if this is something that, with the changes in the rates and everything that we need to consider, I think they need to be brought up to speed also with what's going to be happening so that perhaps they might want to consider, I don't have the neighborhoods listening, they may want to reconsider some of their requirements. I'm like throw down the weed seed, and we may need to get goats approved in the county, but that works for me too. But it makes it difficult for those of us who do live in HOAs that have these huge requirements for this perfect lawn, which I agree, I think it's beautiful, and that's what people want to pay to do, whatever. I just don't particularly want to. So I think that part of this conversation needs to translate over to these HOAs.
I think you're right. I think there's some public information, public outreach that we can do.
I think maybe too, what we might want to look at is working with James City County as far as when new developments come in, that Bermuda's a lot tougher and doesn't require the water that Fescue does.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a suggestion, that, hey, these are water-saving grasses. If you want grass, this is a water-saving. It's brown in the winter, not green, but, you're not watering as much, and the hotter it gets, the better it likes it.
And it grows in fantastically green in the growing
It
months.
does,
Yep.
and it doesn't require that water, so it might be something
Yeah.
that we can assist in the other side of the house.
We've got, in Ports County, the homeowners association has started that process on a lot of the shoulders and a lot of the public areas, the gates and stuff, because it's much more water conservation.
They'll go right across the road. I mean, that stuff is tough.
And it's an important conversation to have some of that balance too, but then from also a stewardship of the resource perspective on a cost side, the more that we can do to conserve things, the less we have to think about in terms of higher cost alternative water supply sources that are significantly more costly than what we have the benefit of using today. So I think it's a very important conversation to have, but thoughtfully though too, in terms of
It's not,
making sure requirements are sized right. They're not oversized, and then making sure we're communicating with people about alternatives and, the why behind this pricing, because that's how, when we priced this out, that was the marginal cost estimate for the next increment of water supply was basically at that tier 4 rate.
And when new developments come forward, we can have a condition in there, which we do, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
we're really
Yes.
talking about ones that have already gotten past
Right.
that point,
Right.
and how you convince them to kind of reconsider their own requirements and
Right.
such.
Right. And I think we're seeing some effect of that already. Andy mentioned earlier, 10 years, we've gone from 7,200 to 5,200.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is water
That's
efficient
really
appliances and those sorts of things. But I do think some of that is people are irrigating less as well. Some people.
it's amazing what the fixtures and all are doing,
Yeah.
and how much less water they're using than the old fixtures. And they're incredible. And I like the fact that we're using less. And I think this 4-tier system is going to, help us, a whole lot. And I like the fact that we're still the lowest in the area.
But we still haven't solved that problem of the inconsistency that we allow people to get sub-meters, right? So that we're charging them a higher rate for the water that's coming in, but we're not charging them for the sewer going out. And so obviously they're not using the sewer, but it frustrates the effort to say you're going to pay for irrigation.
Right. Well, and Stantec is the company that did our irrigation analysis last year, and that was something we specifically asked them to look at was the sub-meter issue. Because sometimes I look at sub-meters and I think we're encouraging that which we don't want them to do. And so I do think there's some inconsistency. But their analysis really indicated that sub-meter was such an equity issue that their recommendation was not to do away with sub-meters, but to get to monthly billing as quickly as possible, because in their experience and nationally, they've seen where that conversion to monthly billing, as Andy was stating earlier, it gives the customer an opportunity to adjust their behavior much more quickly.
Yeah, the other problem, of course, is we're trying to discourage people from sinking their own irrigation wells too.
That's right.
Yeah. So we don't want them to do that, obviously. And if you charge them for the sewer fee, then you're encouraging them to do that. So
you're giving them a better economic return on
you're
that
running into
investment.
two conflicting incentive systems.
Yeah.
Now, is that something that should be addressed at the General Assembly, that if you have water at your house and it might be harder to get a second well put in order for irrigation, because or maybe the second well is in the first tier, it's not down there where our drinking water is now. Maybe it's like on there, it's not necessarily can be the best water, and maybe that keeps it out of our aquifers that we're looking to.
Right.
Okay, we're not going to limit you from not putting one in, but you can only put it in the first aquifer. You can't go down into the others.
Currently, a resident can go to the health department and get a permit for an irrigation well, and we have no ability to prevent that. There is a bill before the General Assembly that basically says that if you want an irrigation well, you can only go as deep as the superficial aquifer.
Good.
So that is something that we're watching carefully, and I would think we would support.
And that's Senator Mason's bill.
Senator Mason's
Good.
bill. Yeah.
Does this require any action?
No action is required. Just my final comment is that the recommendations in this report are what we plan to build our proposed budget around. So if there were any reservations about that, now would be the time to let us know. But otherwise, we intend to build our 2-year budget around these recommendations.
I think that's the only way to stay stable and be able to plan for the future and have what we need to continue to run properly.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay.
All right, well, with that,
Thank you very much.
I'll look for a motion to adjourn until 4 p.m. I'm sorry.
I guess just before you adjourn, there had been some discussion about going back into closed session. If that's something that you want to do, then, but if not, that's fine too. It's up to the
I'm
board.
fine.
We can't talk
personally-
about some of the items that we're going to talk about.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's no need to go in closed
Right.
session. We'll have to figure
Okay.
I mean, we can
another
always
way in
call
public session.
you if
Okay.
we need to.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, adjournment would be
Okay,
appropriate.
motion to adjourn until 4 p.m., February 25th, 2020, for the regular meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Eisenhower. Aye. Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
All right. Very good.
Thank
you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely.
Very informative.
Yes.
Can we take a 2-minute, 5-minute?
Two.
2 minutes.
4.5.
Make it fast.
Well,
Meeting the James City County Board of Supervisors for a work session. Mr. Stevens, please call the roll.
Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
here.
Mr. Ripple?
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Here. Okay. We will start with board discussions, pre-budget work session presentation. Ms. Day.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
I really have two objectives for us tonight. The first one is to provide a financial update on fiscal year 19 as well as fiscal year 20, which of course is the year we're currently in. And then I also just wanted to touch base on the fiscal year 21-22 budget process, provide an overview of where we are year to date and where we're headed over the next few months. So fiscal year 19 is the most recent completed fiscal year. It ended on June 30th, 2019. It was a good year in that the revenue exceeded the budget and the expenditures came under budget. The total of those two numbers is approximately $2.4 million. That surplus, a portion of that went to fund outstanding purchase orders. So our commitments at year end, where the work wasn't quite complete, carries forward into this budget year. And then also we added to our fiscal liquidity fund balance. About $1.6 million of the 2.4 went to that. With that addition to our fiscal liquidity, we currently sit at 12.6%. That's the fund balance representation of total expenditures, and that's right within our policy. Some of the highlights from fiscal year 19 on the revenue side. The first portion of this are the revenues that exceeded the budget. So we had real property taxes and personal property taxes. And both of those were primarily the result of collection efforts by the treasurer. She has engaged two companies to assist professionally with the collection of delinquent taxes, and those efforts have been successful. Also on the sales tax side, we did see a little bit of an uptick. It's a long time since I've been able to say that. We suspect that that's partially due to the Wayfair decision, which has to do with the taxing of internet sales. On the other side of it, the revenues that came under budget, primarily we saw that for recordation taxes as well as our building permit activity. Those two revenues do tend to fluctuate quite a bit just based on activity. They are difficult to estimate. Recordation taxes, for example, can vary greatly just depending on the value of the real estate that's being recorded. Building permits, we often see an inverse relationship where we may have an increase in the number of permit activity, but the projects themselves are quite smaller in scope, and therefore it's actually less revenue. Flipping over to the expenditure side, for fiscal year 19, the primary driver of savings on the expenditure side was personnel related, and that was also due to turnover and vacancies. Typically, we see most of the savings there in fire and police. That actually wasn't the case in fiscal year 19. Most of the savings was really more spread across the other functions. We had some savings in county admin. Of course, for the first quarter of last year, we had a vacant county administrator position, so that resulted in some savings. Human resources had some savings, IT, dispatch, and the treasurer. I did want to note for health insurance, we did have an unusually high year in fiscal year 19 for our claims. We are self-insured, and so we tend to have a reserve that we set aside. It had been a number of years where we were able to add to that reserve. And in fiscal year 19, we were able to use some of that reserve as opposed to dipping into our fiscal liquidity. We do keep a very close eye on that. We like the best practice is to maintain 25% of your claims in reserve. So we looked at that to make sure we were still above that limit, and we are. We did know about this time last year as we were working on the budget for this year. We were watching the claims. We had recently switched carriers to Cigna, so we were looking at that to see if maybe that was a trigger. And we did, as a result of monitoring it, increase premiums for fiscal year 20 by 10%. Since that time, we've also hired a new benefits consultant. They have some more 3D technology tools that we're able to utilize and really dig into the data a little bit further. One of the analysis that they'll provide is the types of claims where we're seeing high activity and a high fluctuation. We're also taking a deep dive into our prescription drug coverage, looking to see what's happening there and if we're utilizing generic drugs, for example, as opposed to some of the more expensive name brand items. So that is something we're monitoring on a monthly basis, and you'll hear a lot more about that during this budget. Okay, switching back over to real estate taxes. Here we like to look at a 5-year trend. For both real estate taxes and personal property taxes, you'll see that these revenues do continue to climb. We have a reassessment period every 2 years. And so those years based on this graph would have been 2017 and 2019. And we'll have another one in fiscal year 21. Then for personal property taxes, again here we tend to see a very consistent, steady trend here with increases every year. We talked a little bit about the building-related revenues. Again, this being primarily building permits. And
I'm sorry, Sharon, can I just ask, does the 24 million include the state share of the personal property tax?
It does not. That is local. For building-related revenues, again, building permits and recordation taxes, these do tend to fluctuate, as you can see. But usually they run to $1 million for the building permits and about $1 million to $1.5 million for recordation taxes. On the consumer-driven side of things, for sales taxes, as I mentioned previously, sales tax is projected to come in a little higher than budget. And again, that has to do with the internet sales being taxed at this point. I would suspect that that will level off. We'll make adjustments to the budget for that increase, and so you'll start to see where that levels off in the future. In fiscal year 19, that was the first year we had the 1% historic tax, and that's what's represented by that red bar graph. That also came in above budget. In 19, I believe we budgeted 4.5, and it came in a little above that. We did adjust the budget in 20 by about $50,000, and we expect to exceed that as well. Meals and lodging taxes are very consistent and they're trending. Even when we had the economic downturn, meals tax in particular continued to go up. People continue to eat out, and so these have proven to be pretty reliable in terms of trending. I did want to mention the 5% lodging tax. A portion of that is restricted to be used for tourism-related activities. 3/5 of that we do transfer to our tourism fund to be used for that purpose. And for business licenses, I did want to mention, you'll see a spike in 2019. You may recall in 2018, there was an issue with the mailing for business licenses where it appeared that first mailing was not received. And as a result of that, a subsequent bill was sent about a month later, but we lost some time in that collection period. And so what happened was some of the revenues that typically would have been collected in 18 were collected in 19. And now we've leveled back off. Comparing the most recent completed year, fiscal year 19, to the 20 budget and the 20 estimate, in terms of the bottom line for our current year budget compared to where we believe will come in, we're pretty much on budget, about $100,000 above. One item I wanted to draw your attention to is the other category, very last line there. You'll see in fiscal year 20, the budget is high compared to fiscal year 19, and that represents the recycling program. That's the charges for services for recycling, and that is about $1.6 million for recycling. We do not anticipate to meet the $1.6 million in revenue, which is why the projection is lower at 7.8. However, the expenditures are also down quite a bit because there's less users of the program. The tonnage component of what we pay the vendor is also down. Okay, in terms of where we are and where we're headed for the next budget cycle, I just wanted to take a minute on some highlight a few items. First, for fiscal year 21-22, it is a 2-year budget. The first year is appropriated, and the second year is a plan. It is a real estate reassessment cycle year. Currently, we are expecting a 1 to 1.5% overall increase. We do expect the residential to be on the higher end of that and commercial on the lower end. We do have a 5-year CIP plan, similar to our 2-year budget. The first year is appropriated. The 4 remaining years are just a plan, and that is reevaluated every year, and we reprioritize items there. And finally, we're actively monitoring the state budget. Governor Northam did release his budget in mid-December. We have quite a bit of information that's starting to come into our office now. We're obviously looking for mandates and any changing in the funding. We're particularly interested in the school division and educational funding. The LCI, the Local Composite Index, will be reset for next budget year. And at this point, we're anticipating a decrease in our rate for James City County and Williamsburg. It's an inverse relationship. So when that goes down, typically we receive more state funding. So we'll be looking at the school division to provide those estimates to us soon. There's been quite a bit of internal work that's been done over the last couple of months, so I just really want to take a moment and provide an update on what's been done and where we're headed. We did kick off the personnel side of the budget this past fall. Human Resources and FMS have met with all the departments. All of the requests have come in from the departments. We received 58 requests for fiscal year 21 and 22. HR and FMS have performed our independent analysis of those requests. We've sent our questions to the departments and we've received their responses back. And we're meeting with county admin this week to go over that. We also kicked off our CIP program in the fall. Very similar, we've received the request. FMS works with the planning department on the CIP request. We also had some questions where we followed back up with the departments. We recently met with county admin to go over those requests. And now the next step in that process is everything's forwarded to the policy committee of the Planning Commission. And they will have a series of meetings over the next couple of months. The rest of the operating budget, we've also received the outside agency request. That's from all of our partnerships with community organizations. Our departmental requests have been received. We're currently in the process of analyzing those requests. We are certainly looking for things like completeness or any questions we may have. And we have begun our process of forecasting the revenues for next year as well. Something new that we did this year, we issued a podcast in January to talk about the process, more about where we are, what we've done, and where we are now, and the opportunity for the citizens to get involved going forward. A second podcast is planned after the proposed budget is released. That is something we've historically done, where the county administrator will go through his proposed budget and highlight some more details. And then a few considerations as we approach fiscal year 21 and 22 budget. Staffing levels, I'd mentioned previously, we've received 58 requests. The majority of those are requested in fiscal year 21. Also, employee compensation, cost of living considerations, benefits. We had mentioned health insurance and monitoring that. We've also received our rates from VRS, and our rates are going up about 1.5%. That's primarily because of the discount rate that they apply to to their investments. They had projected a 7% rate of return, and they brought that down to about 6.75 based on their actual experience they're receiving. And anytime that happens, your percentage contribution goes up. So that's a statewide issue.
And what, I don't know if you have the number now, but if you can just send it when you have it, but how do we stack up in terms of funding for the retirement program?
In terms of our percentage, it's about 75%.
75%, because that's,
Yes.
I think we had a presentation that said 90% for local government was more the average, so we are lagging behind that.
I hadn't heard the 90%.
I thought you mentioned that 90% was the state employees.
No, I'll have to go back and take a look at that.
I know there were some localities that did fall behind the average during the economic downturn. DRS did offer them an option of paying a lower rate, and some localities did opt to do that. We were not one of those. We continued to fund the rate that was recommended, and that turned out to be a very wise decision. Another consideration would be school funding, both for operations as well as their capital needs. A land preservation, conservation, PDR program. Affordable housing has been discussed quite a bit. And then also the potential for a sports tourism venue. Some of the major milestones over the next several months and opportunities for citizens to be involved. We've had our pre-budget public hearing that was held back on January the 14th. Obviously, we are here tonight discussing the past, present, and future. We have the proposed budget document that's scheduled to be released on March 27th. And again, a podcast will follow with more details after that. We have a public hearing that's scheduled for April the 14th. The budget is scheduled to be adopted on May the 12th, and it typically takes about a week to pull the document together and post it on the website, which is available to the public, of course. And that's all I have. Have any questions?
I've got a few. The podcast was very, very well done, and I hope all the citizens get a chance to listen to it and see where everything's about. The 53% of the funding for our budget is for schools.
Yes.
And I don't think a lot of citizens know how much we put into schools and how much it takes to run a class act school that we have, and very proud of it. And then when you add fire, EMS, and police and all that into the scenario, that ends up to be 2/3 of our entire budget.
Yes.
So we're left, for the citizens to understand, we're left with 1/3 of our budget to run the rest of the county.
Correct.
And that's amazing that we can, do we do with 1/3 left of the budget to run all the rest of the county. That's, when you learn that, and I learned it when I got on the board, but when you learn that, if you're a citizen, you learn that, you're amazed because you think there's more money to run the rest of the county than there actually is, and there's not. You take 2/3 of your budget totally out for a few things, and then the rest of the county's got to be run on that 1/3. So, I just wanted to make sure the citizens understand that, how efficient we're running things with the amount of money we have. We never have enough money, and they never have enough money. We're all in the same boat. But how much it takes to run, fire, EMS, police, and the schools, and what we're left to do all the other items that we do in James City County on 1/3 of our entire budget.
That's correct. And that does include the county share of debt service and capital as well.
Yeah. So it's amazing. Thank you.
So, and if I missed this, I apologize. You said you got the requests and you've gone through them, and now you're going to go to county admin. Have you prioritized them at all, or?
We have gone through the personnel requests and the CIP request. What we're looking for there is just questions, omissions, completeness, that type of thing. We do have a meeting with HR to go over the personnel requests where we've asked for their prioritization because they see things more countywide.
Okay.
Where do you see the biggest need from their perspective? That helps narrow it down for us, and then obviously to present that to county admin and to you as well. For capital needs, the Planning Commission takes care of most of that. They'll do a priority list based on the strategic plan, the comprehensive plan, and some of those tools that are in place. We're currently now going through everything else, what we consider the non-personnel side of the budget. That's what we're going through now. That includes our outside agency funding request. We have a number of departments that we work with there, those that work directly with these agencies, and they help prioritize those for us.
Okay. All right.
One thing I would mention as we start here, Scott has taken and put together the list of things that we did from the retreat. And I want to make sure everybody gets a copy of this. And so, we can, if you have any questions or want to discuss any of that right now, but I think the plan here is for each of us to take this and provide feedback to Scott and the staff on what we see as the priorities on these. He's lumped them as one-time funding and year-to-year funding and other. And if you want to discuss it a little bit, Scott, tell them what you're looking for.
Mr. Chairman, I guess, and this is from the weekend retreat, and then the items you had, Jason and I just put them in different categories. If you think they should all compete together, or if you like the categories, or if one ought to move around, you certainly wouldn't offend us in any way. We were just trying to give you some different things to consider, and then if you like this ordering, we would send something out and let you just give us a 1 to 6 or 8 order on each of the areas, and we'd at least bring that back as part of the budget discussion.
Yeah, I guess for me, not to get ahead of myself, or to get ahead of you, but is county complex. What I would like to know too is how that goes with the facilities study, I guess, that's been done, and what efficiencies might be realized by putting us together, and what might happen to this land. So it's not just county complex. It's a little bit more wider than that for me.
Okay.
So that I would know where my priority falls in that. So then when you do send this out, you want us to number it and give it back to you.
We were just trying to get independently. It was a suggestion of the chairman that we sort of get you independently what your priorities are, 1 through whatever. We would compile that and give it back to you so you can see if one item is your number 1 or 2 for each of you. That would certainly say there's some consensus around that and give us maybe some direction on with what discretionary money there is, or if there's additional revenue needed, what it could go towards.
I like them separated like this. I think it helps to figure out where the puzzle pieces go. Yeah.
And the facility study was basically jump-started with the talk of the county complex, and, you know, to try to go, is it needed, is it not? What are we gaining, what are we not? So then we could make a informed decision. So, you know, the county complex, as I've been pushing, everybody knows, but
get out of here.
You know, first time here.
Yes.
And but yeah, it goes hand in hand with the other, so that we will have more than enough information to go, okay, is it this year? Is it 10 years? Is it, where is it? Is it even, you know, so that'll all come together.
That's exactly right. And to your point, it's the space needs study has almost been completed for about 3 months, but it's close to being done. So we'll be bringing that to you. That will lead to the facilities that studies each individual building that we have to sort of tell you what the future needs are expected per building, which would then provide the data that you and Mr. Ipple were talking about of telling us what the overall costs would be to maintain what we have versus what we gain in efficiencies and doing something else.
And if there's savings or if there's not.
That's correct.
Right.
So pre-K program, can you refresh my memory of what, I mean, that's kind of general.
It's pretty broad. We didn't get a whole lot of specifics through the weekend. I know we've talked pre-K in terms of school system and being part of that and the larger community discussion of what's the future of pre-K, and I think that's where it sort of falls out of there. It does get into your funding mechanism that I think it is maybe a one-time investment in something, but it's an ongoing cost, which is why I've left it down that year-to-year funding versus one-time. But you could make an argument that at least the initial capital cost for something is a one-time expenditure, and then operation is a much lesser part of that. But
well, I think one of the things that we're going to have to watch as it evolves here in the General Assembly, of course, is the funding. Because there's proposals for funding for significant increases to the pre-K program. There's other proposals. And by the way, we did send a letter to our legislators about the request that they consider putting funding into teachers' retirement to try to save that. Otherwise, what would be that 1% or so increase that we looked at locally, which could mean a lot of money. So, you know, as those things shake out at the General Assembly, I think we'll have to come back and discuss and revisit this as we go. But I thought it was a pretty good list. I would request everybody to, you know, give it some thought, give it your ideas, and then we'll let Scott and the staff consolidate it and see where we are to see if we're divergent on some or if we've got consensus on some, and that'll help frame the discussion as we go forward.
Okay.
That's mine.
He's done.
I know what I want.
So you want this now?
Whatever works for you.
Whenever.
That's right. It doesn't have to be today. This week would be great.
All right.
County complex number 1?
He had it memorized, yeah. Okay.
All right,
So that,
are we finished?
everybody has that. Other questions or discussion on the presentation,
I
or
think so.
any? I think this is what is necessary. I think to be helpful to give
Okay.
staff the idea, because I still think one of the most unfair things you do is to tell staff to go put a budget together and then come back and to give it to us, and then we'll tell you if you got it right or not. And that's really not.
Can you add these three things?
Yeah, it's not really fair to do. So trying to give them as good a possible feel for where we are as a board on these issues, it helps them frame the budget so there's less turmoil as we get further along.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, discussion, John?
So you're going to send this out electronically?
You'll do that.
Thank you.
That's your worksheet, though. You can scribble on that too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very
y'all.
much. Very
Thank you.
helpful.
That's very good. Thank you.
Okay. We are now down to board requests and directives. If anybody has any. No, Michael?
No, sir.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
I'll move right on. I save all mine until we get to the
All right.
regular meetings.
I'm okay.
John? Voila. Okay, we are through board request directives. We now have consideration of a personnel matter, appointment of individuals in county boards and commissions pursuant to section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia for Planning Commission and Thomas Nelson Community College Board. And then discussion concerning prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business or the business's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community pursuant to section 2.23711A5 of the Code of Virginia. I'll take a motion for those two. Do we need our attorney's not here. Do we need to do them separately, or do we need to do that?
I think you.
So as long as you mention both of them.
All right, we mentioned both of them, so I've got a motion. So we have a motion. Mr. Stevens.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. Ripley.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
All right, closed session.
Closed session. 5, and
Mr. Chairman, I move to certify that we only spoke about those items we indicated we would speak about during the closed session.
okay, Mr. Stevens, we have a motion.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Ripple?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I'd move to nominate Robert Rose for the Roberts District seat on the James City County Planning Commission for a term that would expire on January 31st, 2024.
we have a motion. Mr. Stevens?
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Ripple?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. And I believe that completes our business, and we're looking for adjournment until 8 a.m. on February 6, 2020 for the VACO Government Day at the Capitol, and that will be assembled here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we have a motion for adjournment to that?
We do.
Okay.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Ripple? Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.